Well, welcome to Move the Stairs. This is episode 112. We're recording on July 30th, 2026, and today we're going to do an interview that will hopefully change lives. We're glad you're here because today's conversation is going to be packed with insights that may surprise you.
Mitch, you are so right. And today we are joined by Brian Teal, who donated his kidney, I think just last week or the week before. And he's the co-founder and executive director of Next Step, Next One, and by Rachelle Bryant. And she is a kidney recipient. And they're going to talk about living kidney donation and how they're building brands and changing lives in the living kidney donor space.
Yeah, Brian's going to tell us how his team came up with this idea for a kidney convo, which is a really cool deal. This is how they've transformed the donor experience, and it translates into a program that anyone can take part of just from the comfort of their own home using their laptop. It's really a unique donor experience that I think will inspire a lot of people.
And then from Rochelle, we're going to hear about ideas for using storytelling to develop media for dialysis centers where patients spend just grueling, untold amounts of hours every single week.
And Brian has turned how we think about brand protection on its head from the perspective of myths and objections, which has made this new program very successful.
All right. Well, without further ado, we'd love to welcome Brian and Rochelle to the studio. So, Brian, say hello.
Good morning, everybody. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Rochelle, welcome. Introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rachelle Bryant. It's so good to be here today. Thank you.
Awesome. So let's start with Brian. You're a storyteller, you're a filmmaker, and an altruistic kidney donor. But it's your title of photojournalist and producer that took you to Guatemala, where you met a number of kidney donor athletes. That led to your wife donating her kidney, and then it was, as Diane pointed out, just recently you donated your kidney. So tell us a little bit more about the evolution, how you got into this, and then eventually what led to the genesis of Next Step, Next One.
I was invited, being a documentary filmmaker, they're kind of few and far between for people's Rolodexes. So I was invited to go along with 17 living kidney donors who were taking on the Three Volcano Challenge down in Guatemala. And as you hike, you walk and you talk. And what I realized in day one was that this had nothing to do with the elevation and the heights, the physical heights that these 17 donors could reach, but it was the common, unbelievable bond that they shared in finding this sense of purpose with their life by something that they chose to do to help someone else. And so I spent the next 6 days with this group of people and didn't really ask the questions of what did you do? It was more, why did you do what you did? And I really kind of started being completely intrigued by the decision that they made and how that had just had this amazing, profound impact on their life. And when I returned from that trip, I was sitting with my daughter, Abby, who is a master's in public health. She teaches public health. And we started talking about my experience, and she shared with me how this is a classic public health issue, and that public health policy and public health change gets implemented through education, and that the stories that are getting told most often in this space are just simple ones of need, not from the donor perspective of the purpose that is given to them once they do help someone in need. And so on that trip, about 3 a.m., a little voice came to me in the middle of the night. Next step, take the next step, be the next one. So a kidney donor many times will, in an image, will do this, which means they given one and they have one left. So take the next step, be the next one. And that became the brand of what we began. And we received funding. And over the next 10 months, we launched this educational campaign on social media. We garnered about 1.5 million views, and we analyzed the data on the stories that were connecting with people and the different story threads that I was creating, and really drilled down on what was resonating with people. We interviewed donors, recipients, patients in need. And that's where I met Rachelle. Traveled down to her home and we spoke about what the journey was like. And we put all those together. And then from that, we cultivated the best of the best. And we created this virtual experience, this program called the Kidney Convo. We can do it virtually or we can do it in a live format. And it runs a story arc like any good movie. We set up the villain at the top of the program, and the villain is kidney disease. And we introduce you to the heroes who come in and help. And then we leave you with the ripple effect of those decisions and how it's impacted both the recipient and the donor on the output. So, our moniker for that, our brand for that is Come Curious, Leave Inspired. And it's because of that full story arc that we're able to do that.
That's fascinating. So thanks for sharing, Brian. Let's bring Rachelle in. Rachelle, first of all, I understand today's your birthday. Is that right?
It is. I get to be 48 now.
Well, you didn't have to give your age. I just was curious.
Oh no,
I just
I'm
wanted to.
very loud and proud about the years I get to have. So, yeah.
Yes, yes, that's right. That is a good point. Well, thank you for sharing your special day with us. So, like Brian and his wife, you know firsthand what it's like to be involved with a kidney transplant. I mean, can you share your journey, how this changed your life?
Absolutely. So I was actually diagnosed at age 16 with polycystic kidney disease. And it was by chance, actually, my biological dad had polycystic kidney disease, and my biological grandmother, I did not get to grow up with them. So that's why I kind of refer to them in that manner. And I was having headaches. And of course, the first line that they looked at was, do you have this disease that's in your family history? That's why it's so important to know your family history. And the way that you're diagnosed is that you get an ultrasound on both kidneys. If there are cysts on both kidneys, you have the disease. It's pretty simple. It was also very devastating not having grown up, knowing anything about the disease or really any of part of the journey. And back then, back in the day, they didn't really have pediatric nephrologists. So I was always put into adult spaces. Even though I was 16, I was still a child. And that's super important. So I'm really glad that over time, people have noticed that there's a huge need for pediatric nephrology because you're just treated differently. And the doctor that I was referred to, I lived in North Texas at the time in Dallas. He told me, live your life to the fullest. You're going to die at 40. And that is such an awful thing to tell a 16-year-old. I wasn't even done with high school. And so I lived with that narrative, as we all often do when somebody speaks something that big into you. And I allowed it to not really truly influence, like went to college, went to grad school, got married, had kids, but in the back of my mind and in every way that I approached any part of life, it was, well, you have until you're 40. Today, I beat that by 8 years. So with that, my situation's very different. Thankfully, because I was diagnosed so early on, I was able to take really good care of my body, super active, ate the right things, drank plenty of water, sometimes too much. And so I had that ability to step into when you hit the 20%, when you are officially, able to start the process of being listed. So that was a huge gift for me that I always try to share, that the majority of people crash onto dialysis. And so I was given the gift of an early diagnosis. And with all of that, I talked about having this disease. I also have what's called polycystic liver disease, and it's the same disease. It affects polycystic kidney disease affects all of your organs. It can affect your heart, your liver, your kidneys, your brain. And so I have it in two places, and I thought I was going to need a dual transplant. So I talked about it. I knew the importance of talking about the need for donation early. It just kind of came to me. I learned by example of other people that talked about it. I knew that it was important to be on social media and talk about it. And really, it was just my avenue to start sharing my story and saying, I have two sets of twins. I'm a mom of four, and I'd really love the opportunity to watch them grow up. And so that was a lot of my journey into that space. And I actually had 30 people get tested for me. I know we're going to talk about the importance of asking later on, but I had 30 people test, and one person made it all the way through um, until the very end. And unfortunately, they found something was wrong with her kidneys. And so it was kind of a blessing in disguise. She's okay now. It was a very temporary thing that she was able to fix, but it disqualified her. And so during Christmas time, the wonderful community of Evergreen, Colorado, someone put, "What is something you want or need for Christmas?" And my husband got on there and said, "I would love a kidney for my wife." And within 5 minutes, a woman who lived 5 minutes down the street that I had never met said, "She can have mine." And the journey began. So there's a lot of parts to it. But I was a COVID uh, transplant recipient. So there's a lot of details there. I don't know how much you want me to go into that today, but she got qualified. We had a celebration at the end of February of 2020. We had a bunch of friends. We were celebrating, and I had, what was it, March 13th, everybody was sent home. And with those of us with kidney disease, they said that that transplants were elective because we had dialysis. I promise you, dialysis is not the elective choice that a lot of people think that it is. And they shut down kidney transplants, most transplants, but mostly kidney transplants through the rest of March, all of April. I did get a few calls for donor kidneys, and most of them got thrown away because they had no idea that, COVID kidneys is what they called them, were just as fine to put, into people. So there were about 4 calls that I got. All of them were no-goes because they all tested positive for COVID, unfortunately. And then in May, I got a phone call saying, "We're back up, we're good to go, but you need another surgery." One more surgery, because my gallbladder surgery 8 years beforehand wasn't complete. So they wanted to make sure that that was taken care of because of infection risk. And that sadly was what put me on dialysis. I had made it, I had run the race. I had almost crossed the finish line, and they said, "Because of this surgery, we want to go ahead and put you on dialysis to clean everything." And from there began my aggressive hope that I wasn't going to be on dialysis for very long.
Yeah, your story is just proof of the multi layers that come with this whole process. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
When, we always look at moving the stairs from the lens of brand protection, and the first leg is customer service. So, Brian, you gave us a little bit of an overview of the kidney convo. Can you please expand on that a little bit and talk about the people who you're trying to reach who want to consider donating their kidneys? And what was the most important thing that you were thinking about when you were developing that program?
It really was based on it's called the stat story sequence. It's how we make decisions as humans, and life insurance agents have been using it for years. They will tell you a stat, which engages a certain part of your brain, and then they will tell you a story. They will tell you that you need $1 million worth of life insurance. And let me tell you about a client of mine who, when he had that and was in an unexpected situation, his family was protected. So that's the stat story sequence. The entire convo starts with this stat: 13 people every day die waiting. So think about that. In a theater mode, I can take the front row of the theater, count off 13, and say, "You don't make it to the end of today." That's that That's the stat that hits you and kind of that's the shock moment. And then I introduce you to real people like Rachelle and others, donors who have taken the journey and who've taken that next step in taking that leap of faith and why they did that to go help. And for my wife and I, just to help a complete stranger. The night before I donated, I was out playing pickleball with the neighborhood pickleball group, and the woman next to me said, who are you donating to? And I said, I don't know. I'm just hoping he can get out and have an evening like I'm having tonight. And that's enough. And I think even saying some of those things out loud to people, it starts a conversation even in their own head, like, am I making the most of my life kind of conversation? And then you get introduced to people again who have walked this journey and then come out the other side and really inspire you to maybe see if you can do more. And it's a safe space that we create to ask questions, to find out more. It all starts with education. And this model in this short story format, introducing you to a number of people in a wide ranging demographic, it leads you through this journey that I had a young woman in Bedford, New York say, I came in here tonight going, oh, hell no. And at the end was in the right time and place, I could do this. So in 90 minutes, we took her from, oh, hell no to, yeah, I could probably do this. And it really is that sequence of real people just sharing their stories. And Mitch, are you still there?
Oh, yes.
You ever seen Ted Lasso?
Oh, yeah.
It's not really about soccer, is it?
Not at all.
And that's what the kidney combo is. It's not really about kidney donation. And I've used that with national directors in this, and I knew the one guy played college soccer and the light bulb went off. And that's what we're trying to create, this sense of this not really about kidneys. It's how do I view my life? How do I view others' life? How do I view the value of people's lives? How can I help, even if it's a stranger? And the kidney combo, you will leave with something, even if you don't decide to take the next step and donate.
Think that's so right, Brian. You know, the first time I went to the kidney convo, I think you told me about it maybe 2 months ago, and you and I go way back decades, and so I was like, I have to just kind of look at this, and you know, in any one of these things, there are myths and objections, and I had my list before I walked in, and I had my what I thought was I was going to see, and the reality is that the education that I got, but in such an emotional way. No hard sell, just here are the facts. You decide, and if you can help us, great. And if you want to just tell somebody else about this, that's great. That was fantastic. But I'm interested in the myths and objections that you hear when people first are approached about even coming to a kidney combo.
Yeah, and we call them the but what abouts. And the but what abouts are really fear-based. And there's a great line from again, I because I've talked to so many people and I know this space so well that Tracy Hulick said she's a donor, and she said we don't let fear rule our lives. We don't let fear stop us from opening up a door to see what's on the other side. And how many times, whatever it is, not just kidney donation, meeting somebody or going and learning about something, do we let the but what about which is really just fear of the unknown. And so when you kind of educate people in the but what abouts and you see someone who looks just like you, who was able to put the fear aside and go forward, um, it's amazing that and the medical system will take care of you. Like they don't want another patient coming out the other end of the operating room. So the fear is really, I don't want to say it's an excuse, but it's an easy crutch to lean on when you just don't even want to learn more. And the other really, really vital part of this that we learned was the ask is hard. And for a patient, I mean, it's hard to ask the girl in eighth grade to go to the middle school dance. You try asking someone for a kidney, and that psychological headspace that a patient lives in, it's as if they don't even know how to ask. So, in a way, what we're doing is we're educating people so they don't have to. We've given them this tool to invite their family, their friends, their networks, their book club, their church, whoever to just come learn. And so we melt away the fear in hopes that their story is really being told through everyone's story. And going back to my Ted Lasso analogy, look at the cross section of that cast and the different and how they affected one another within those storylines. And but it was really the collective that gave that show the power that it has. If it was just Ted Lasso, you wouldn't have had a show. But it was the multicultural, multifaceted, with a few villains here and there that really made you feel good about life. And I mean, Diane could speak to this better. When you leave the convo, you're kind of like, huh, maybe the world's not such a terrible place.
Oh, you are so inspired when you leave the convo, whether you decide to take the next step or not. And anyone who I know who has left it has definitely gone out and talked to other people, which is always the first step, about what they've learned and the things that they thought they knew, and that whole conversation of, I didn't know this. Did you know that? Did you know, for me, my mom has kidney disease. And so when you really approached me, I was like, well, I'll come listen to this, but I'm out because if she needs kidney, I got to be here. I got to be ready to go. And then you find out about the golden ticket that if you give your kidney, you get to list 5 people who, if they need a kidney, they go right to the top of the list. So it's those types of things that are so fascinating to me.
I have a question for both of you. You've both touched on this, and so Rochelle, let's start with you. You've touched on this, but I want to go into it a little deeper. When someone's considering becoming a living kidney donor, it's perfectly natural for them to have fears, objections, thousands of questions. But I'm curious how you navigate that because how do you address those fears and concerns and questions in an honest way? And then at the same time, making sure those people never feel pressured to donate.
I think it really comes through just sharing your story and letting it land on their heart. That's the first step in terms of it was never really for me personally asking anybody. It was just continually sharing, like Brian said, education, making people aware, and just organically letting it fall onto their heart. Then the fear doesn't really settle in other than like the surgery part of it. But even that, they're doing it for someone that they love or someone they've connected with or someone that they know that they can give continued life to. And so I think in terms of the objections, I think that that's such a personal discovery space for them in terms of, can I do that? And I know that a lot of times the objections are actually in the family unit for most people in terms of, I want, this is on my heart. I hear it all the time. This is on my heart, but my family doesn't want me to do it. And the way that I handle that is that it's your life, it's your body, it's your decision, it's your heart, and that you have to do what's best for you while also being in a space of learning how to find that balance of respecting their fears because they may not be fearful, but their family members might be.
It's a good point. I could see somebody going, I'm thinking about this, and then their spouse or their friend or their mom going, "Now wait a minute, what are you doing here?" So, Brian, how would you add to that?
So that is very true. And because I've got this collection of over 100 people that I've talked to who've lived this journey on both sides of it. Um, I let them tell their stories, and the first step in all of that is education. Just like what Diane went through when she learned that there are processes out there. All public health is to change perception and to change actionable items is increasing motivators and decreasing the barriers. One of the barriers is education, the lack of education about these systems that are built out there. For me personally, and the start of all this happened on top of a volcano in Guatemala, but next one really took form when a young man named Francisco in Indianapolis, I got done interviewing him. He was in need of a kidney that week. He had lost his job because he had gone to dialysis and he just could not continue to work like they needed him to, and they fired him. And he looked at me and he said, I didn't choose to be sick. His parents didn't speak English, and he was just stuck. He was just stuck. And so I finished, and he handed me his phone, and I had him put our link tree in his phone so he could follow this social media. And he looked up at me. I'm a complete stranger. I've known him for 30 minutes. And he looked me in the eye and he said, do you think anyone will help me? And I was like, I laid awake that night. It was hard. I could not get his eyes. This just soft-hearted plea. Do you think anyone will help me? And so my oldest daughter is an executive director at the Blue Bench, which they help victims of violent sexual assault. And she said, and she's got enough therapy background. She said it has to be enough, Dad, that you saw him and you're trying to help him. And so that has been his picture hangs on my wall in my office, and that helping one person has to be enough. And in the fourth section of the convo is this ripple effect. So when you help one, you just start this domino effect. Well, if you did it, maybe I could do it. And so we all have this kind of lightning strike moment where you see someone, whether it's a loved one, whether it's someone you know or someone you don't know, but also is someone's father, brother, son, sister, if not for mine, then for someone else. And for my wife, it was a young woman named Jess House who lived in Cincinnati, now lives in Arizona, and she talked about dialysis. And Jennifer literally overheard the story coming out of my edit bay. She came down and she said, "Did she say dialysis was painful?" And I said, "Yeah, it's hard. It's hard on the body." She walked back upstairs and she looked at Jess. Jess was about the age of our oldest daughter, and she said, I can't sit by anymore. And she walked up and she started the process. So this lightning strike moment of whether you know them or not, you do, I guess, through the eyes of the people in your own family and your own inner circle. And that's what I'm trying to encourage people to understand, that may not be my son, but it's somebody's son. And that your good health can be a gift to someone else who hasn't been as fortunate.
Rachelle, this next one's for you. You mentioned, making the ask and how you hope that what comes from your heart falls on somebody else's heart. Is it difficult to ask people to become a living kidney donor?
From the standpoint of someone needing a kidney, yes, it has become easier now to support this cause and be an advocate for others. There's this level of like survivor guilt that happens in this space where you have to really wrestle with your worthiness, and you have to wrestle with, well, someone else might need it more than I do. In my case, the person who offered to donate was not a direct match. So I was part of a paired exchange. So my kidney actually came from Connecticut. And I don't know any of the circumstances behind any of that. I just know that it was a woman who's 10 years older than me. And so in terms of the ask, I think that it's important to know that everybody has their own internal struggles that they need to heal and walk that journey with. It's not a complete healing. I still have survivor's guilt oftentimes. when I'm struggling and, my mental health isn't the best, and I go see somebody else probably should have had it who might not be struggling. It's just real talk, is the donation, the the transplant doesn't end, it just continues the journey, right? And so there's a lot that goes with that. So in terms of asking somebody, it continues to be difficult and it's not guaranteed to last forever. And I have friends that have had second and third kidney transplants. And sometimes I do think about, would I be able to ask a second time?
That definitely
Moving.
makes sense.
Yeah, that's really moving to think about that. Um, it's such a monumental thing to go through first time. I can't imagine having to think about, I may have to do this a second or a third time. Wow. And Brian, I think another one of the questions that a lot of people have and have heard, and certainly I had heard, is that actually the transplant is pretty easy. Now, Rochelle, you can tell me if I'm completely wrong here, but pretty easy for the recipient, but can be a bear for the donor, and that there's a lot of pain involved. Do you want to address that?
Me?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
especially since you're what, how many weeks in at
Yeah,
this?
I was 3 weeks yesterday, so yeah, that little hitch in my side. You know, actually the psychological or the emotional recovery was harder for me because I've been 62 years. I've never had any health issues really, and I'm that golden unicorn. So I didn't know what to expect, and I was my wife's caregiver as she donated in January. I was her caregiver through the process, and my journey was way easier. And there was a new medication that they gave for pain recovery. Is it painful? Yeah, it's a major surgery. They cut four holes into you and to retrieve this gift for someone else, and you have a recovery. But as one donor likes to say, you're giving up 4 weeks of your life to give me back the rest of mine. And in that context, in that risk reward model, I just couldn't see any downside to I've got it out for 4 weeks, right? There's an end to that road. And every day as I recovered, I just went into the headspace of my recipient and all that he had gone through. All I know is it's a man somewhere in Colorado, and that's enough. And in my letter to him, so at donation, we can exchange letters. And in my letter to him, I stated out loud, and this is actually something that Rachelle shared with me from her side of the lens, and that it can be difficult for a recipient to ever be able to thank you enough. And I don't want someone else living in that headspace of, and so I stated it out loud and made it pretty much my letter was, I know you are grateful, but I want you to know, and I need you to know, and I need you to fully understand that so am I. I am grateful that I have had such good health, so much so that I can share it with someone else. So why don't we both take this moment and just move on with our life and try to make the world a little kinder, gentler place. And I'm going to make that promise, and that's really all I would like you to do is help someone when you can, and let's just leave it at that. And so the whole process really is much more, to me it's much more emotional. If you get a knee replacement, whatever, right, you get a root canal, there's going to be pain involved. It's temporary, you move through it and you go on with life.
It's so well put, Brian. I really appreciate you sharing that perspective with us and sharing that moment that you had just a few weeks ago with your letter. For the audience, maybe tuning in for the first time, at MNC, we're all former journalists. So, hearing Rachelle earlier talk about, some of or kind of teasing some of what she's doing, um, to spread stories and raise awareness about, these conversations that need to happen, really piqued my interest. So, Rachelle, can you talk a little bit more about your endeavor to, you're pulling together a series of short stories and my understanding is you want to reach people at dialysis centers. What are you hoping your work leads to? Is it awareness? Is it more donors? Is it inspiration? Is it something else?
I love that question because really my ripple effect from my kidney transplant was a couple of years ago. My husband and I said we need to do something. We didn't know what it was, and it organically fell into the publishing space. This is not a space that either one of us even imagined being in, but we just knew that we needed to get stories out into the world about subject matters that aren't talked about, that people are afraid, their reputation or what have you. And I think that's why Brian and I kind of fell into a wonderful space together, was because he actually came out and interviewed me right on the heels of finishing my book called Expiration Date Unknown. It's that one right there. And he even got to record the first part of my book, which was so special to me because I was writing it with fear. Fear and I kind of just hold hands and we just keep going. And so I wanted to create this space of collecting stories. We keep circling back to education, and the best way is to get back to our roots, which is storytelling. That was the original, books that we had before anybody knew how to write or even use certain types of language. And so going back to those roots, sharing those stories. And I had the honor of doing one of the first, if not the first, I think, live kidney convo in Denver a couple of weeks ago. And I told Brian, I said, we need to write books. We need to gather, we need to collect stories. And in a way that everybody's voice is honored. It's not, there's no publishing agenda. Everything I do in my publishing space is nothing like traditional or hybrid or anything. It's just really collecting people's voices, raw, real, and authentic, and making sure that their story is their story. And that ownership piece where they get to find healing through sharing their story. And that's what we do with all of the books that we make. And that through that, not only just dialysis centers, because having had dialysis during COVID, I don't know, are there books or magazines laying out? I don't know, because we weren't allowed to touch anything. I wasn't allowed to go to the bathroom. I wasn't allowed to drink. I wasn't allowed to take my mask off. So, but I was in talks with, I have to have a checkup every 6 months and I do it virtually. I was talking to my PA last year and I was telling her about all of these things. And she said, let's connect you with the social workers in all of these transplant centers and the dialysis centers and all of that, because you have 4 hours of doing absolutely nothing. It is really hard for someone who's very productive like I am to have to sit there for 4 hours, as well as the toll it takes. Statistically, it circulates your blood 12 times per hour. So imagine having all of your blood in your body drained 12 times per hour for about 3 to 5 hours. Everybody's kind of different. And so there's not a lot that you can do. So making these books also into ebooks or what have you, where I saw a lot of people with Kindles. It's really that education part. It's giving voices, just like Brian does through video, through the written word, because there's so many opportunities where somebody can go, that was part of my story. That was part of I hope that's part of my story. The other side parts of the story. And so it's a community, it's a club you don't want to be a part of, but you can have that piece where you feel like you're not alone, because when you sit in that cold chair, I don't know if any of you are familiar with dialysis, but you usually are wearing sweaters, you have a blanket, you have a pillow, all of that. You're sitting in this cold space, you're separated, you're sitting right next to another person, but there's this big machine that's separating you. You still feel very alone. And so I think that the importance of it being a gift, you're not alone. Here you are, you are being seen, you are being heard. And I think the process of collecting stories is one of the most powerful things you can do, so that there's so much isolation in the world that people know, hey, it's not just me.
You're not
Yeah.
alone. Right.
You tell them.
Somebody,
Rochelle, I have a question that it may seem basic on the surface, but I ask because I don't know. And that is, what is the toughest part of waiting for a healthy kidney? Because I'm imagining I'm not the only one that doesn't quite understand that. And I'm curious if these experiences we that you may go through, we rarely hear talked about, the general public doesn't know, and maybe just as important, the media doesn't know or it doesn't talk about or doesn't understand. So again, what's the toughest part of waiting for a healthy kidney?
I think the most important thing is to kind of give you some context that if you're lucky enough to even get tested, you go into like two pathways. You get to go into the pathway of waiting for a deceased donor or a living donor. And you sit in that space, even if you have a living donor. So even though I had one, I still got 4 calls for deceased. And that you have to have your phone on at all times. You have to have it consumes your life. And I think the waiting part, my family and I went on a trip in January. I had been listed in October. I had to tell them, hey, I'm gonna be gone. Your whole existence is surrounded by somebody else making a decision. And you, like I said, if you're even lucky enough to get listed, that process is very difficult. So you're waiting and you're also kind of in this balance of, do I prefer a deceased donor? Do I prefer a living donor? There's a lot of statistics around that in terms of, how long is the kidney going to last? That is all subjective, honestly, like based on your health, the medicine, the health of the kidney, all of that. And so getting those phone calls, I can't tell you how many times, like you have to have a bag ready because you have to go right away. Then there's the factor of something called PRA. Women tend to be a higher percent of PRA because those are your antibodies, and that's your ability to accept or reject a certain kidney if it becomes available. And so I had a high PRA for a lot of reasons, mostly because I had 2 twin pregnancies. So each pregnancy kind of makes your antibodies go higher. And so, men typically are able to get those like kidneys faster because their PRA is lower. So if they're like male to male, female to female, that's a lot of factors that go into that as well. And so just answering the phone. So I had to drive from Evergreen to Denver to get my blood tested. Then they cross test the blood. So that was what, like an hour and a half each way just to get home to be told it's not yours. And that over and over and over, even if you have a living donor waiting for you or you're a part of the paired exchange, also the level of like waiting. So fortunately, because I was so healthy, honestly, in my situation, I was like a car who just needed a new part. Everything else, I was on zero medication, which was a first for my hospital. They were like, "Are you serious? Really? No medicine?" Yes, no medicine, no medication. And just having that, like, is it mine? Oh, that one's not mine. And then just being grateful that it's somebody else's. Is this one mine? No, that one's not mine, but somebody else gets to have their life saved today. It plays a huge toll on your mental health. It plays an even bigger toll on the mental health of your children. All of mine were under 18 at the time, under 16, actually. I think I had 13-year-olds and 6-year-olds. And it's just, and then also my husband. Can you even imagine having your spouse? Oh, my spouse gets to be saved today. Oh no, it's not her time. So really just that back and forth. And then in my situation, the COVID aspect of it. That's the hardest part, is just wondering when it's going to be your day.
Now,
if I can add one quick thing to that, uh, people who have gone through this process become kind of just bionic advocates. I mean, just crazy advocates for someone else, and that's what Rachelle is kind of talking about. Is it wasn't my day, but it was someone else's, and you have to find that hope in anything. And every program that we do starts with a question, and the entire program is framed around hope. What is something that gives you hope? And we can all identify with being hopeless, and we can all identify with being hopeful. And that's something that a lot of people don't stop and think about. What's something that gives them hope in life? And an advocate that we work with a lot, his name is Wilson Dew out of Oakland. He said, "We're hope dealers. That's what we're giving people. We're offering these stories up and giving them hope because I have known people who have whose loved ones decided I'm not doing this anymore, and in essence they take their own life because they stop going to dialysis, and eventually they just can't do it because they've lost hope that anyone is going to come and help them. That goes back to Francisco. Do you think anyone will help me? And it's that hopelessness that I think really drives me to show people that no one should live in that space if we can do something about it.
And I'd like to reframe something that might be a misconception is that just because we have the hope of a transplant doesn't mean that we have any more or less control over our situation. So, just because we have dialysis as an option, it's not always an option for someone. And just as someone with, let's say, cancer is an example, they don't have, they can go to chemo, have radiation, all the things, but at the end of the day, it's not our choice. So it's not that, oh, they gave up or they did this or they did that, whatever. We are terminal. We're grateful that there is this option called dialysis, but there is an option of just letting life happen the way that it was written originally in your DNA for most of us. It was a DNA design for me. And so I just want people to know that, like, none of us are giving up if we choose to either A, not go on dialysis, or B, go off of dialysis. There's no space of giving up. It's a space of just saying, I have fought the good fight and I am ready to go home, or whatever your belief system is. So I just want to really spread that awareness in this space.
No, that makes sense, and I like the way you put that. I do have one more question about creating the book to help with isolation and the aloneness that a lot of people might feel. And all I'm hearing is that there is so much hope. It's heartbreaking that so many people won't get a kidney donor, but it's also life affirming that so many do, or whoever does, that they get that. Do you think about how you can position the book project to solve a problem for someone who's dealing with the isolation of needing a kidney transplant?
Absolutely. So I'd love to point out that Brian was probably the first person that ever made me feel truly seen. And that was by giving me space to tell my story. And it had nothing to do with, I don't even remember how we connected. Somehow we connected. I think I filled out a few questions. He called me right away, but he was the one that gave me, I think to some extent I was still feeling isolated, and I think that in terms of the positioning with our kidney convos, I think, having a network of people all around the world and a lot of people throughout the US, I think we need to get into so many different spaces. We need to get, Colorado is an amazing state with amazing people, but it doesn't just stay in Colorado. So I've already been talking to people. I have authors in about 35 states right now. And just having those constant conversations about, like, how did it feel for you to share your story in this space? Imagine if you knew somebody. So, like, for instance, my book, and I'm releasing the next one next year. This book takes you up to the moment where I woke up and I said, I made it. or I did it to my husband. And then continuing with that, I think the importance is just landing in all of these educational spaces, landing in opportunities like this where there's media spaces. I think we just need to normalize the conversations, and we need to make it like, oh, I'm going to a kidney convo. Oh, really? I went to one a couple of months ago. And just normalizing talking about something as though we normalize anything else that might be hard to talk about. And so Brian and I are going to definitely come up with some strategies in that of, who can we reach out to? And sometimes it's not even about making, and I talk to my authors about this all the time, and everybody comes with the same answer. If I can impact one life, I did what I wanted to do by showing up for myself first and then for somebody else second. And that's the space that we're just trying to create, especially in this space as well, that they're showing up for themselves first. Can you imagine how amazingly healing that's going to be? And then their family members are going to get to read it, and they're even going to be educated. Like my husband, and my kids, they're like, wow, I really didn't even know about that part because he never shared it. And it was because they told their story to themselves first. So I think in terms of positioning, that's where we need to start. Tell yourself your story first.
Think that's absolutely true. And we work with so many patient groups, and I do hear that over and over. And it is fascinating to me that I think I've been working with patients in different disease states for almost 20 years. And just like today, and just talking to you, Rachelle, and Brian, even to you, after knowing you for all these decades, I've learned so much. I'm just interested sometimes in how you can amplify that. And so, Rochelle, are you thinking about doing any type of a book launch, or working with the media in that way?
I'm open to anything. I just kind of say yes to Brian. Brian says yes to me, and we just kind of figure it out. We have so many things that we haven't even been able to discuss. We haven't talked because he was this, amazing donor just recently, and all of this is unfolding. And so, just open to everything that life presents and just say yes and figure it out.
Think it's great. That's a great way to do that. And when you're doing that, you're building the brand, but you always have to watch out for, what's coming down the pike. Could there be some issues that are really challenging, and are you prepared for them? Which is what we do when we talk about brand protection all the time. And I think that the resilience, first off, the two of you are walking resilience. I mean, there couldn't be any two people that I know who aren't more resilient than the two of you. You're the exact definition of it. But I think that it's so important that you do watch for those challenges. And luckily, Rochelle, I have to agree. If you give Brian a challenge, he's just going to say, "Let's go," and that's what he's done with Kidney Combos so far. So good for the two of you. That's great.
I think that if I can add on with what Rochelle said, we're doing it. The goal right now is really outreach and how we bring this program to more people. And we break it down into supply and demand. So on the demand side is the patient who is trying to find a living donor. And so we've created a roadmap to very small, very, very small bite-sized steps that they can take, because you have to remember they're exhausted most of the time. They have brain fog, they're suffering from a chronic illness, and they need help. And on top of all that is the ask that they don't really want to go into a conversation with someone. And so we ask you not to come to the program to donate, but to come learn. And so that pathway for the demand side brings people, brings community together. And then I have a dear friend who works for Project Cure, and shout out Project Cure, but she does outreach to a lot of corporate entities that are looking to bring their workforce together under one cause, to bring them together to talk about something larger than making widgets at their desk every day. And the commonality that it gives people a purpose. And so she's come to the program and she has said, you need to get into these corporate spaces. They want you to share your message, share your story within their workforce to give them kind of a bigger meaning with what they could be doing with their life. So I'm doing the outreach on the supply side, and we're also working that demand side. And then when you beautifully bring those two entities together, someone in need and someone who raises their hand and said, maybe I could help. Let me get educated about this and let me see if I can help. And you put them all under one roof, that's community. That's how we get to know one another, how we walk with one another, and, in my pie in the sky, maybe make the world a little better place.
I'm curious when you talked about addressing people's concerns or questions or fears in an honest way. I imagine there are so many questions that it would be easy to go down a rabbit hole and then kind of lose focus for a moment on what you're up to. So when we talk about keeping this mission, on the front page, how do you focus on your mission while you're answering all those questions? Is that easy to do or is that a challenge?
Within the convo itself, obviously there's a resource page that we leave you at the end. It's really, think of like, Mitch, you've got enough of a background doing color and play-by-play, right? One of you is doing like he took the ball 6 yards up the middle and blah blah blah. Well, and now you learn more about that player. Well, we're doing color and play-by-play. So the convo has a donor, it has a recipient, and it has a medical professional who kind of walks you through the nuts and bolts of really what happens with insurance and who pays for what. Laparoscopic versus robotic. It's the really nuts and bolts, and the color commentary is from the two people who've just lived it, who've done it. And so bringing all that together in just 90 minutes and then leaving everyone with a resource page and an invitation to come back to the next one. And that's what a lot of times happens is, oh, I wish my family in Atlanta could have seen this. Well, we have another one next week. So having a stacked repetition and having enough of them out there for people to engage, see what it is, and then invite someone else. It the hope is that it starts just kind of filling itself because your questions get answered. We don't go deep into the medical side. That's not our, we're giving you, we call it step zero, introduction into the space to learn from the people who've just done it.
And the flow is so amazing. We have some times where like there's a video playing and it gives those of us that the recipient or the donor time to answer specific questions. And then there's also spaces where we get to uh, also kind of share different parts of our story in terms of like whatever direction that the conversation or the questions are going into. So Brian's done an amazing job of like creating an impeccable flow for those of us that are in that space to really be able to answer them through typing it or verbally. So it's a good system.
Brian, this next one's for you. What has your relationship with Rachelle and the other people that you have met tell you about the impact of the work that you do?
I mean, they've just become my dearest friends. I mean, not to start crying on this, but they really are. They're just like I go to work with these people and I go to war with these people to try to teach people. And for me, I get through the day because my therapy and my medication is the story. And to be able to share these amazing people with their amazing stories. I mean, Rachelle just touched me when I get to meet her kids, being invited into her home. And I don't know how many people I've just become very, very dear friends because of this common mission that we have to not leave anyone behind, to just really see people in the suffering that they're going through or the heroics that they've gone through. And I had somebody at a party last weekend who came up to me and her name is Alex, and she had tears in her eyes, and she knew that my wife and I both were donors. I was a recent donor. And she said, I just want you to know how, and I said, stop. I said, I don't like the pedestal thing. I don't. And she grabbed my arm and she said, you don't understand. And with tears in her eyes, she said, my best friend lost her husband at 52. For 12 years, I had the Thursday shift to drive him to dialysis, and I watched him waste away and leave his three children without a father. You don't understand what it is that you did. And I didn't know Alex had all of that happen. It's not something you bring up, right, at a dinner party in the neighborhood. But the number of people that have been touched by this, that we have to keep moving it forward because it's not really talked about. And if you think about, if I had you go back and count the number of times we said kidney in this podcast, there's a reason we don't, because this really is more about our human connections, our community, seeing other people and trying to help them if you can.
Rachelle, I get the last one is for you. Um, when we're talking about, protecting, building a brand, you protect that brand. And part of that is addressing some of the concerns that can come with it. And there's got to be some concerns when you choose to go out there and publicly tell your story. You're sharing personal aspects about your life. What are some myths that you can debunk after you started to do some of your storytelling that might otherwise encourage people to do the same?
I think the best way I can answer that is really I built my brand on not having any fear of anything that anybody would ever think or feel or judge. And so for me personally, and for being in spaces with other people, like with Brian and countless people who are sharing their stories, is just giving themselves permission to not care about what other people think about them, to be rooted in their story and be proud that despite whatever chapters are written in their story, whatever they've gone through, that now they're on the other side of telling their and sharing their brave and just putting it out there, to be vulnerable and share all the details. The book that I wrote, the first one, it had very little to do with my kidney transplant. I needed to set the foundation for people to understand who I was, what I've been through, what I've gone through, what I'm continuing to go through to really understand my kidney story better and to understand. And I'm, saying the word kidney on purpose because we haven't said it that often. But in terms of protecting your brand, the only way you can do that is just to show up authentically. Because then you don't need protection. You don't need to protect what's authentic. And you need to live by example and show people that there's no shame in your walk. The only shame is what you allow other people to speak into you or how they judge you. And that's the best way that I can say anything in that space, because it's just a complete lie that we ever have to protect anything as long as we're showing up ourselves and not having to people please or be in any of that. And another aspect that I wanted to also share to tag with what Brian has developed, this is a healing space for all of us. This entire space, I've had the privilege of being connected with a donor. His name is George. We got to do 2 virtuals together, and he wrote a book, and we just recently exchanged our books, and we've been like talking on the side. But I'll never know who donated, whose kidney I get to carry. But because of Brian and all of these spaces, I get to be with other donors. And so that void has been filled by the love and the connection. And we just need more human connection. And it's so amazing that we get to just be messy together in all of this and we get to support other people that don't feel well enough, honestly, to have a voice right now.
It's beautifully said. And I think that's, I love being messy with other people. That's a good thing. And that human connection means everything. This has been an amazing interview. We've done 112. And this one has touched my heart. So thank you.
Thank
Jordan,
you.
take us home.
Thank
Well,
you.
Brian and Rachelle, we really appreciate you taking the time today. And I want to thank you both, on behalf of the entire M&C team. Just an incredible conversation. Not ones, that we have a few of these. They don't come up very often on the Move the Stairs podcast, and we really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you so much for having us. Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity. I can't imagine spending my birthday in a better way than loving on other people and being in the space to celebrate the extra years that I've been able to have. So thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, well,
Happy
thank you.
Brian,
birthday. Happy birthday. And here's
happy
to so many
birthday.
more years.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah, thank you
Brian,
for just sharing and speaking from your heart. It reminds me that this may look on the surface like a medical story, and it's really
mhm.
a human connection story.
Yeah. Yep.
Where can we go to learn more, Brian?
Next step, nextone.org.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again, Brian Teal and Rachelle Bryant, for joining us on this Move the Stairs podcast episode. These two have really moved the stairs without question. And thank you all for listening, and we hope you join us again next time for the next all new episode of the Move the Stairs